Well, CBS News and the Washington Post have obtained White House records of former President Trump's activities on January 6th, and they reveal a nearly 8-hour gap in entries in his call log and daily diary. Now, this raises important questions about just what Trump was doing all that time and whether he was making calls on so-called burner phones, which are disposable and untraceable. Robert Costa is following this story for us and joins us now. Good morning, Robert.
Good morning. We have obtained 11 pages of internal White House records from the day of the attack that were turned over to the January 6th committee. They show for the first time a detailed and official account of Trump's phone calls and behind-the-scenes activities that day. They also notably contain a gap in the official records during the assault. Something is missing, since the gap stands in contrast to extensive public reporting about his calls at the time.
As chaos engulfed the Capitol building on January 6th, President Trump spoke repeatedly on the phone with allies and supporters, some of whom urged him to put an end to the violence. But none of those calls are reflected in the 11 pages of those White House records for January 6th given to the House Select Committee. There is a massive 7-hour and 37-minute gap in calls from 11:17 a.m. to 6:54 p.m., which includes the most violent period of the attack. CBS News has confirmed at least 2 calls during the attack that do not appear on the phone log or the daily diary. One call from Trump to Utah Republican Mike Lee, and another call to Trump from House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, who described it to Norah O'Donnell by phone as the violence was unfolding. The committee is now investigating whether the president and top aides used so-called burner or disposable phones to avoid scrutiny of their calls during that time. The logs do show several incoming and outgoing calls on the morning of January 6th, including from Rudy Giuliani and former President Trump's chief strategist, Steve Bannon. At 8:37 a.m., Trump spoke with Bannon, who sources say told him to call Vice President Mike Pence and urge him to block certification of the election. Trump later did phone Pence, failing to persuade him. But that call is not listed in the records. There is a listing at 11:17 a.m. The president talked on a phone call to an unidentified person. CBS News has learned the Pence call was in that time frame. There's also a lengthy gap in records of the former president's movements during the attack, as recorded in his daily diary. At 1:21 p.m., the records note the president met with his valet. That notation signifies the president's return to the Oval Office from the rally. The next entry isn't until 4:03. The president went to the Rose Garden, it reads, where he participated in a video message to supporters.
This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home.
Bob Woodward said uncovering former President Trump's actions in those nearly 8 hours will be a key part of the committee's investigation.
These records seem to have disappeared. This is the day when they are protesting the January 6th effort to certify who's president. And the certification was that Joe Biden won. And 1,000 people attacked the Capitol right at that time that there's this gap. Who was he talking to? What was he doing?
Last night, Trump said in a statement, "I have no idea what a burner phone is. To the best of my knowledge, I have never even heard the term." A Trump spokesperson said that Trump had nothing to do with the records and assumed any and all of his phone calls were recorded and preserved.
Robert, you know, there's so much video of how things unfolded that day. You get this sense that you know minute by minute what has happened. And increasingly, I'm realizing there's so much more that we do not know. We have here a 7-hour and 37-minute gap. What's the significance of that block of time?
Well, as you said, we keep trying as reporters to piece in the picture, and we are learning some things, even though these records that we've obtained at CBS News with the Post have these enormous gaps at times. President Trump at the time, in his final days in the White House, was talking to Rudy Giuliani and former strategist Steve Bannon, who, let's remember, said all hell was going to break loose the day before the riot. He was talking to Trump. So was Giuliani, ahead of Trump's talking, his conversation with Vice President Mike Pence. So we're trying to map out how everything played out ahead of the attack.
I want to ask you about something that a federal judge in California said yesterday, ruling that former President Trump, quote, likely committed multiple crimes in his efforts to stop Congress from certifying the 2020 election results. What led the judge to say something like that?
It's a serious statement from Judge David Carter, who ruled that he found it, quote, more likely than not, unquote, that Trump and his legal advisor, John Eastman, engaged in criminal conduct as they pushed Pence and Congress to hold off on certification. Carter wrote, if Dr. Eastman and President Trump's plan had worked, it would have permanently ended the peaceful transition of power, undermining American democracy and the Constitution. He added that if the country does not commit to pursuing accountability for those responsible, the court fears January 6th will repeat itself. In a statement, Eastman's attorney said his client has a, quote, unblemished record as an attorney and disagrees with the judge's findings.
So I want to ask you about the news that we reported just moments ago, that the Select Committee voted unanimously to move forward with contempt charges for Peter Navarro and Dan Scavino. What more do we know about that? Did either of these men cooperate in any way at all?
They are not cooperating. Two former Trump aides, two loyalists to former President Trump. They are both claiming that because they believe President Trump can assert executive privilege over conversations and documents, they do not have a responsibility legally to cooperate with the committee. This will keep playing out both on Capitol Hill and likely in court.
And before we let you go, I got to ask you about your most recent reporting with Bob Woodward about Ginny Thomas, and that the January 6th committee may be considering calling her as well. I mean, after those text messages, I wouldn't be surprised.
Last night, CBS News learned in a conversation with Benny Thompson, the congressman who's chairman of the January 6th committee, that a subpoena or an invitation to appear is certainly on the table for Ms. Thomas. They have not made a decision inside the committee about exactly how they will move forward, but they met Monday night, and it's clear that that option is under discussion.
I tell you, Robert, curiouser and curiouser, as Alice in Wonderland would say. Sometimes it feels like we are in Wonderland. Thank you very much.
Thank you.